Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. We will be discussing menu labeling and how to prepare for and respond to questions that you might receive from either guests or the media after publishing your nutritional information. My name is Gillian. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at ABC Research Laboratories. My background is a PhD in food science, specializing in food processing and quality. I've been with ABC over 10 years, and I've really built our food service, restaurant, and hospitality offerings. I'm a certified food scientist by the Institute of Food Technologists, and I'm very excited to be talking to everybody today. Another team member I'd like to introduce you to is Yulia Vervieskas. She is our business developer that's specifically dedicated to food service, restaurant, hospitality clients. Her background in food science has really been specializing in food quality assurance and nutritional analysis. And so she is a great resource for any questions that you might have. And if there are any questions that we don't get to today, Yuli will be following up with you guys after the presentation. She also is a degreed food scientist and has been with us for 4 years. Quick background on who ABC Research is if you're not familiar with us. We are a food testing laboratory that's been serving the food industry since 1967. We are a full service laboratory specializing in microbiological, chemical, and nutritional testing. We are ISO 17025 accredited, which is the highest level of quality assurance accreditation a testing lab can attain. And we have very specialized programs for restaurant and food service. So today, some topics that we're going to cover. If you've been with us on our 2 previous webinars, we've already gone through, in the first webinar, the basics of the new menu labeling regulation. Really that it's, chain restaurants, 20 or more locations are going to be required to publish caloric data and other nutritional data by December 1st of 2015. If you were in our second webinar, we talked about the different ways to get that nutritional data, whether you need to submit samples for a full laboratory analysis, whether you're going to use a database, whether you're going to use supplier provided data. And so today we're going to talk about really being prepared to publish that data and getting in touch with all of the different risks out there and how to plan for them. And especially today, we're going to talk about guest questions and questions from the media. So let's get started. So in preparing to publish this information, you've gathered all of your data from whatever sources you choose to use, and let's do a reality check on it. If somebody new to your restaurant chain looks at the data, where are their eyes going to go? Well, they're probably going to check out the highest and the lowest caloric values first. That's what we would all do. So look at those menu items. Does it make sense? Do a reality check on the data. If you have sections of your menu where you have a marketing claim, so let's say you have a less than 500 calorie section, or maybe you have a low sodium section or a low carb section, I would very much make sure that I've checked all of those items, because you really are making a marketing claim. You're opening yourself up for critique pretty much on that claim and whether or not your values are valid. Sometimes when we look at menus, there isn't really clear language when we talk about sauces and dressings and whether or not those are included on certain menu items. And I think depending on the way you choose to put your menu together and really showcase different dishes, you may see some different opportunities in calorie listing as well. If you're listing a salad without the blue cheese dressing, the caloric value is going to be a lot lower than if you're listing it with, maybe the 1.5 ounces of dressing. So again, communicating clearly about that will manage guest expectations, and it'll also manage media expectations if somebody is going to go back and check your work. Also note that really before you publish, this is the last chance to reformulate or resize an item. Sometimes when we do nutritional analysis, we're shocked at maybe how many calories a dish has, or the sodium level in a dish, and it makes us start to question our formulation. So before you publish, think about it. Once you put that information out there and you give that to diners, you give that to the media, it's hard to take that back. So prior to publishing, leave yourself plenty of time to talk about reformulating or maybe resizing a menu item so the information you're putting out there isn't as shocking. So let's talk about avoiding conflicting data. Really what I wanted to point out is just make sure that your message is consistent across all channels. We talk about calories have to be disclosed on menus and menu boards. Well, menus come in all shapes and sizes. A menu could be a printed menu that a guest is given when they're seated at your restaurant. It could be a menu board where people walk up and look at a menu board to make their selection. It could be your wine list. It could be your kids' menu. It could be a menu that you use as part of advertising your restaurant. Think about, a door hang tag or maybe something that you would mail out that has a menu on it. That also is part of this regulation. Tabletop displays. If you list regular menu items on a tabletop display or feature them on a tabletop display, if it's done in a way that resembles a menu, you probably need to think about including that in your checklist of where to put calories. Your website, that too is a menu. And especially if you're going to talk about tying that in perhaps with a digital menu board that's in your restaurant, you want to make sure that all of that data is up to date. And then anything on social media, you may have a menu that you keep current on your website. Well, remember that you have maybe a menu on your Facebook page as well. You really want to have a consistent message across all channels. And I always suggest that if there's a workflow established or a standard operating procedure established for adding new menu items or changing menu items, make sure that checking literally where all of your caloric information is published, make sure that that's on that to-do list and you check off all of these different channels so one isn't left out. Something else I would suggest is adding an updated date and frequency. And I think we're going to see that on a couple of the websites we're going to look at today. I would say it's helpful if you say last updated December 15th, 2014, or updated on a quarterly basis, just so if you perhaps have some conflicting data out there and somebody calls that to your attention, you can say, well, I said it's updated quarterly and I haven't updated it yet for this quarter. I just think it kind of, it's another step towards transparency, but it also might get you out of a little bit of trouble if you somehow forget about one of these channels where you have some conflicting data. And I forgot to say, as we go through the presentation today, please feel free to put questions in the window on your screen. I will see them, and I'm happy to stop along the way and ask and answer questions as we go. So if any that I haven't answered as we go, I'll try to answer those at the end as long as we have time. And if we don't have time, I'll check in with you guys after this webinar. Let's talk about communicating procedures and limitations. When we talk about putting any information out there for the public to digest, I think it's always important to manage expectations. So if given a piece of data, what can that consumer really do with it? They should know where you came up with the data or how, what they can use it for, what the limitations of that data are, and really, maybe how you verify that you've put out the most accurate data possible and that you've done your due diligence. So we're going to look at several websites today that I found just by Googling nutritional disclaimer. And I've given you the web addresses here. We're going to look at some screenshots from those, and you guys can explore the websites later if you choose. And each of them has a different, kind of a different function. So these first two, I think really feature how talking about how you generated your nutritional data can set you apart. So I think it gives maybe a fuller picture, a more clear picture to the consumer of how you went about getting this data. And then also, if at any point your restaurant is maybe secret shopped and somebody does their own analysis, at least it gives you an idea of whether it was an apples to apples analysis. If you say you did yours by a full lab analysis and the person that secret shopped you does it by a database analysis, well, right there, we're not comparing apples to oranges. And I think that really strengthens your case if you have to defend the data that you put out there. So let's look at a couple of these. So this is Rally's Bel Air and Nob Hill Foods. And this is a disclaimer that was written by their dietitian. It does have a typo in it. So type A people are going to figure that out really quickly. But as you can see, they talk about on the third line right side, we use a software from ABC Research, which has a food database comprised of more than 27,000 items, including extensive nutritional information on each. And so she goes forward and explains, this is how we came upon the data. This is the software that they used. And so I think that helps people know, okay, they didn't do this by a lab analysis, number one. So if they get secret shopped and somebody does a lab analysis, there may be variation there. It would be okay to not get exactly the same answer. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Next one we're going to look at is one of the state universities of New York and their nutritional disclaimer. And they talk about using data that came from the USDA. And they say we also use nutritional data provided by food manufacturers about their products. And I think that's important because they also point out nutritional information is based on the ingredients and cooking instructions as described in each recipe, and by nature are based on statistical averages, and that they also may see some variation in nutritional values based on preparation, origin, and freshness of ingredients. So again, they're telling you where they got their information, USDA and their manufacturers. So there's a little bit of shared liability there between them and their suppliers. And they talk about, that they are based on a statistical average. And that's a very fair thing to say. That's true. And if you got secret shopped, more than likely the person secret shopping you is only pulling one sample. And if you ask a scientist what they think of pulling one sample, you're not going to get a very positive response. That's a blip in the screen. You really need to have multiple samples and create a statistical average to have a good comparison. All right, so another thing that I saw people using in disclaimers that I really like, again, taking that to the next level and showing not only how you got your nutritional data, but showing that you used a variety of methods. So you really did your due diligence. In our second webinar, we talked about the appropriate times to use a database to get your nutritional values. We talked about the appropriate times to use a full laboratory analysis to get values. And I think that Wawa stores actually did a really good job of communicating that to folks checking out their website. So they say their information was derived from testing conducted in accredited labs. So that's fantastic. They also told you if the person was, worth their salt doing their analysis. So an accredited lab, published resources, and data provided by their suppliers. They go on to talk about, there may be product changes and new product introductions or testings. And so, some of the data may fluctuate at certain points. And I think they also point out a very important item in the last sentence. Data is rounded to meet the current USDA NLEA guidelines. So if you're familiar with nutritional testing on retail products, a lot of the data in that nutritional facts panel are rounded numbers. And there are rounding rules that are also included in the menu labeling regulation. And they follow right along with those retail product guidelines. But again, that's important for the consumer to understand. They're looking at rounded values. So if a 0.5 gram of fat is what you have in your product, guess what? We're going to round it down to 0. So I think it's very important to communicate about rounding as well. The placement of your disclaimer is really something to consider. So in my opinion, I believe it's a best practice that if you're going to use a disclaimer, that you definitely put it on your website, because that's probably going to be the most, well, it's a global resource, right? I mean, even if you have a limited regional scope for your restaurants, anybody can look at your restaurant or your nutritional information online. Some people also choose to put disclaimers on the additional nutritional information that has to be provided in writing upon guest request. I think that that is a great idea. If you have somebody who's going to request that information, again, let them know where it's coming from, how you derived it. But I thought that this website in particular had a really unique way of putting their disclaimer out there. So as you can see, here is their disclaimer. This is on their website. This is before I could get to any of their nutritional or any of their allergen information. And so, they talk about getting the ingredient information from their suppliers, that they feel like it's accurate. They tried their best. And then what do they say? I have read and understood the disclaimer and agree to proceed. That's the way you're going to access their ingredient, nutrition, or allergy information online. It's not the prettiest website, but I think that putting it out in front like that, really, it's an interesting idea. So if that fits into your culture at your restaurant chain and that's something that works for you, I just wanted to put that out there. And if not, you'll see some more traditional placements if you go through and you look at some of these other websites. So this is an interesting one to debate as well. Is it okay to recognize a large difference may occur? And again, I think this has a lot to do with the culture of the business that you work in. Some people wouldn't feel comfortable saying there may be a large difference, but in this example, people talk. Let's see, they're talking about nutritional information is not exact and variations will occur due to differences in procedures at individual locations. And I know that that's a big concern for a number of the folks I've talked about, that maybe, a donut shop in one state might glaze their donuts a little heavier than a donut shop in a different state. And having those, regional or individual location differences is a concern. So maybe it's something you want to address. Again, they talk about seasonal and regional differences, which I think is very important. And they also say preparation methods, product substitutions, and serving sizes may vary by location and sometimes greatly altering nutritional content. So again, they're making a very bold statement that's probably going to make some legal and PR groups comfortable, and it's going to make other people go, I don't know if we want to be that bold. But I did want to share that as an example. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about mentioning rounding rules if you use them. That's very important. And just something else to think about in publishing the required nutritional data, many folks will choose to also take this opportunity to publish allergen data if they have not already. The allergen data is absolutely not part of this regulation. It is not required, but I thought I'd address it today because it is something that I talk to clients about a lot. So if we wanted to look at P.F. Chang's, if you access their nutritional and allergen information on their website, you'll notice there's a lot of verbiage about the gluten-free portion of their menu and about allergens and their nutritional data. I know this is a bit of a novel to read, and that's why I gave you guys the websites. But they talk a lot about, they import products from different regions. They may have local suppliers for things. I mean, they talk about rounding rules. They talk about differences in dishware packaging and containers may affect serving size. This truly is an excellent example of a amazingly thorough allergen and nutritional disclaimer. So I think it's a good example. Just if you want to read one, this hits all the high points. Okay, so we talked about, gathering our data, doing that reality check. We've talked about having a very consistent message and making sure that we can tick off all of the different channels where we're going to publish and making sure that all of those get updated every time we need an update. And we've talked about kind of what are some disclaimers, what are some ways that we want to educate our consumer and we want to manage their expectations for the data. So guests are invariably going to have questions, right? Probably if you've already published nutritional data in one shape or another, you've fielded some guest questions. And if you haven't published yet, you've probably still fielded some guest questions. So I think just some topics that we should highlight that guests have questions on. So they're probably going to ask for a general explanation of the info on the menu, especially when next December comes and we start to see a lot of these extra pieces of information on the menu where we're not used to seeing them. Some people are going to be confused between the price, perhaps, and the calorie count. I think that's probably going to happen a lot on drive-through menu boards where there's just not a lot of real estate to put a lot of information. So I think it's important to educate your staff on, what is the appropriate way to explain what's going on our new menus? Why is it there? Why did they not see it at their mom and pop restaurant that only has one location? Just a general explanation of what's going on the menu. Where to find the additional nutritional information if somebody asks for it. Because remember, on your menus, it's going to say that additional nutritional information is available upon request, and you have to provide that in writing. So making sure all of your team members know exactly where to find that, how to give it to a guest. I think that that's very, very important. I think we're probably all going to hear a lot of, I have, fill in the blank with a medical condition or a dietary request. What can I eat here? And I know I grew up working in restaurants. I was always interested in food, so I knew a little bit more probably than the average bear when it came to suggesting what somebody could eat, even before I was in college. But a lot of your team members probably don't have that kind of background. So it might be worth having just a really small portion of your training include, if somebody is a diabetic, they probably want to look for something with lower sugars. Here are 2 or 3 of our menu items that have very low sugar. Vegetarian options. Hopefully your team members would be able to point that out on the menu. So just think about what type of guests you have coming in. What's the age group? What's the demographic? What type of questions are they going to ask? And maybe include that when you talk to your team members about the publishing of this data and that the menus are going to change and all of that. And of course, allergens. If you're going to put allergen information out there, again, it is optional. But if you are going to put it out there, I think it's very important to talk to your team members about how to handle a guest question on allergens. You may choose to have them defer to management and have one person on staff be very, very knowledgeable. You may choose to have your team members defer to a helpline at headquarters that a guest could use. So allergens is a very delicate situation. I mean, you're talking about people that may have a slight allergy or could have a very, very severe allergy. So if anybody after this presentation would like some other information on training and allergy procedures in restaurants, we can definitely provide that. But again, think about all the guest questions that could come in, and think about best preparing your team members, your staff, for dealing with those. A little bit of information can feel very, very empowering and make the whole entire transition a lot smoother. Okay, somebody has a question. They're asking, what is the enforcement entity for this new legislation? This regulation will be enforced by, it will be enforced by the FDA. It is an FDA regulation. You are guilty of misbranding if you're not in compliance with the regulation. And there's really, for those of you who aren't too familiar with FDA procedures, there are only 2 ways to get in trouble with the FDA. You're either misbranding an item, which means you're misrepresenting it somehow to the consumer, or adulteration. And adulteration means there's something deleterious to health contained in that food. So you're going to make somebody sick, you're going to kill somebody. So any regulation out there that has to do with food falls, if you're non-compliant, you fall into one of those categories. In this case, you would be misbranding if you're not compliant. Specifically, if you're asking, how is this going to be enforced? What are the procedures going to be? the FDA has actually, in the regulation itself, stated that they were not going to detail that information right now, that they were going to wait till more of it's out there and kind of fine tune their enforcement procedures. So it's kind of frustrating that there's no distinct answer out there right now. A lot of people have had questions about, well, are they going to fine me if I'm non-compliant? Are they going to shut down my restaurant if I'm non-compliant? All of that is kind of to be determined. But it will be the FDA. The FDA may reach out to more local authorities like business and professional regulation in a state. But again, they're still determining those things. Good question. Okay, so again, let's talk a little bit more about the educating all employees. And I gave these the 5 W's. It's just one version of kind of how to think about a training program before publishing your data. So, the 5 W's, what? Well, we're going to be putting out calories on menus. Who? Well, you might get guest questions or media questions, and we'll talk about how to handle those. When is this going to happen? You can talk to your staff about when your publication date is. So maybe you're not going to wait till December. Maybe you're going to release them on August 1st, and they should be aware of that. Where? Talk about where they can find that additional information for guests. If somebody asks about sodium, if somebody asks about protein, let them know that you guys have that information as well, and this is where you can find it and give it to a guest, when they're making their purchase decision. And then why? I think that that's really your choice. The spirit of the regulation talks about providing nutritional information so consumers can make better choices or more informed choices when they decide what to put in their bodies. You can share that. You can share that you want to be more transparent. So all of the above, whatever you think is going to motivate your team members to really take this into account and remember it when they go out on the floor. Again, discussing options for special populations or folks watching their calories. You think it would be obvious to a guest that if they're watching their weight, they might want to choose things with a smaller calorie count, but you never know. You're probably still going to field that question, believe it or not. And then again, thinking about and communicating to your team members what the chain of command is for really hard questions. I guess maybe asking a question that your team member doesn't know, doesn't understand, maybe it needs to go to management, maybe it needs to go to your headquarter helpline to get a very specific answer. So just that's something else to think about. And just for the general audience, the person who asked the enforcement question that I talked about says they're struggling to understand how they can ensure compliance with hundreds of thousands of restaurants. Perhaps that's why they haven't announced how they would do it. Good point. That could totally be why they haven't announced it yet. And I guess we'll all wait with bated breath. Okay, so let's talk about media questions. So, over the last several years, we've seen some restaurant chains be very proactive in putting out nutritional information. They get guest requests for it. They've done it on their own volition. We've seen people do, have their items go into the Weight Watchers program so people can count points and lose weight. And in all of those cases, we've seen probably every news outfit out there, all of the different acronyms, pick apart different people's menus. They will secret shop and go take samples. They will send it to a lab. And if the values don't agree, boy, they think that they've got a story. So it's going to happen. There's going to be commentary on, the fact that the Bloomin' Onion has a huge amount of calories in it. There's going to be commentary on, menu items that we never thought about aren't healthy. I mean, all of that's going to be out there. So in knowing that the media is going to come and question and maybe put people in the spotlight, I think it's really important to be prepared and let's go ahead and address how we're going to handle all of these different questions. So number one, determine who will speak on a company's behalf. Worst case scenario, you have a local news station that secret shops one of your restaurants and shows up on the doorstep the next day talks to the manager and says, hey, we tested your 500 calorie salad and we found out that it was 800 calories. What do you have to say for yourself? Well, I don't think you necessarily want the manager speaking for maybe your enterprise as a whole. They're not prepared. They're totally caught off guard. And you might have a PR department that would much prefer to handle a question like that. So really determine who's going to speak on your company's behalf and communicate that to your employees. If they are approached by the media, whether it's in person or on the phone, what are they supposed to do? What's the appropriate protocol? And how do they forward that request to the person who's really supposed to have it? And then I always say, have your statements ready before you need them. The best case scenario is you're never going to have to use them. The worst case is you're going to have to use them the day after you publish the data. So I think it's important, again, to think about what the possible questions could be. So let's talk about that. So again, they're going to question or maybe put out some commentary on different calorie counts on your menu. Oh, wow, this is so high, or I can't believe this has this much sodium. So again, be able to explain where you got your data, how you derived your counts. I kind of did the 5 W's for this as well. So an example would be, how did you get your calorie counts? Well, I did a mix of full laboratory analysis and database analysis. Well, who did your evaluation? I have a team in place for verification. So imagine that Diane Sawyer has sampled food at your restaurant. She sends it off to a lab and it's going to be on the national news that the calorie counts that she got are double what your published values are. It would be nice, wouldn't it, to be able to say, I have a team in place that specifically focuses on verifying my nutritional data. They do this by, number one, we secret shop ourselves on a regular basis. We'll go and we'll pull samples from different specific stores that we have, and we'll check on our own calorie counts. We want to make sure that the dollop of sour cream that they're adding to the top of the burrito is the same at all of our different chains, and we don't have that variation. My team also talks to my suppliers on a regular basis to make sure that my suppliers haven't changed the formulation for any of my proprietary sauces that might throw my nutritional data off. Think about all of these things that you have in place that show that you've done your due diligence, that show you're continually monitoring that your values are still accurate. And you want to be able to communicate that on the fly if questioned. Talk about when you validate that data. So data is validated by tests on a quarterly basis and training is reinforced if needed. Where? Well, where did you do your testing? If you outsource it to a third party, we outsourced it to a third party ISO accredited lab that specializes and has a core competency that is nutritional analysis. Again, shows that you did your due diligence. Why? Again, why do you want to communicate any of this? Because you want to show your due diligence and you want to limit your liability. You want to be able to, if put in the spotlight, show that you have a system in place that the minute you publish that data, it was the data that you were most confident in, and you continue on a regular basis to check up on it. I'm also talking about the how and the why of variation. So if we went back and looked at some of those disclaimers again, people talk about menu items being handmade, menu items maybe varying regionally from regional suppliers. Have all of those arrows in your quiver and know how to use those to support. Again, we did our best job putting out nutritional information. Yes, we all admit there's going to be variation there, and this is why. You have your answer prepared. Secondarily, I think another kind of way to think about handling media questions, or if you get secret shopped and the media is saying, well, here's my data on your entrees, and it doesn't match up with your data on your entrees. What are some questions to ask about maybe Diane Sawyer's standard operating procedure for when she pulled her sample? So, I would encourage you to ask that person, how many locations and how many samples were tested? Quite often, the answer is going to be one. And one little blip on the radar does not constitute a nationwide issue with your nutritional analysis values. How was the food ordered? And did they actually get what they ordered? There was a large study done at Tufts, I believe it was, in 2011 or 2012, where they went and they shopped a bunch of different restaurant chains that had published nutritional data, and they found huge variation. And a lot of it was on salads where, you know, a dressing was included. Maybe they got a larger order of the dressing than they really should have, you know, and a lot of the issues in that study, I think, probably boiled down to how they ordered the items. And they didn't know if what they were actually given was perfectly correct to their order. And I think that that's something it's something to ask of someone that's going to question your values. How was the food tested and by whom? So again, if I've been transparent in publishing my data and I've said I used a full laboratory analysis, or maybe I used a full lab analysis and database, and I mixed those two together. If someone goes and secret shops me and only uses lab analysis, and I've used database for that item, right then and there, we're not comparing apples to apples. And I think it's a good way to kind of shut down the questioning of the data at that point. And I would also ask, if let's say they sent it to a lab, ask them who did it, ask them if it was an accredited lab. There are many, many folks out there that provide nutritional analysis that are neither accredited, nor is nutritional analysis one of their core competencies. And I'll tell you what, I wouldn't use any of those folks for my analysis. If I was going to put out, you know, nutritional data, I want to make sure that the people that I trust with this not only are an ISO accredited lab, they carry liability insurance, that this is something that they do on a regular basis and they're experts in the field. And then again, even more specifically, what are the qualifications of that service provider? So let's say Diane Sawyer went to her local environmental lab. They don't really do maybe a lot of nutritional testing, but they wanted to be on the news, so why not? We're scientists, we can do it. Ask what the qualifications are. You know, are they used to doing this analysis? How many scientists verified the data? All of those things. I think they're all fair questions if somebody's coming to you and saying, I disagree with your values. I think to elevate that conversation, you really have to have transparency on both sides. So ask these questions. All right, so we have about 20 minutes left in the webinar today. If you have not seen our first two webinars and kind of want more background on the regulation, you can find those on our web address. We also have a number of white papers about picking a nutritional analysis services provider. We have a lot of information on our website, so I would say please go and avail yourselves of that. And then we do have our next webinar, My Nutritional Testing is Done. Maybe you are an enterprise that has had nutritional data for a while now. We're going to talk about whether or not you're really ready and kind of go through that checklist of what you've done, what you haven't done, how old is your data, all that good stuff, just to make sure that you truly are ready to put that out there for public scrutiny. So I'd like to go through and talk about any questions. I see another one. Question is, I've been told in the past that we are allowed a 20% variance for nutritionals. Is that still the case? Great question. So if we're talking about retail products, so all the products we go into the grocery store and see with a nutritional facts panel, there is a 20% variance on all of those products. For the menu nutritional labeling, FDA is looking at that in the same way. So 20% plus or minus is really where they want to be. I think that expecting restaurants to have as precise of data, or as, well, I shouldn't say as precise of data, but expecting restaurants to have as reproducible menu items as a retail product that is truly, mass produced to be absolutely identical. It's very, very tough. You know, if you have handmade products, if you have people that get to maybe kind of drizzle a sauce, you know, my drizzle is going to be different from somebody else's. You don't have those issues in retail products, but FDA is wanting to see really that same precision in the data that's out there. So in putting that data out there, I think that's an important thing to talk about in a disclaimer. Any other questions? And I think we're giving you guys some good links in the chat window if you want to go look at our menu nutritional labeling resource center as well. So, okay, another question. If the consumer didn't get what was ordered that results in analysis discrepancies, isn't that the restaurant's responsibility? It seems like it's not the testing that's off, but the ordering serving procedure, which reflects poorly on the restaurant. So once you publish that nutritional data and you do have somebody secret shop you and check up on your values, that does reflect poorly, in my opinion, on that restaurant. I think one of the ways you mitigate that is by having your statement ready for the media to say, you know, number one, there's always going to be variation in the back of the house. It's a handmade item. You know, we use different suppliers. You have all of that ready to go. You also talk about, hopefully, that you have a verification program in place yourself. So you're already checking up on yourself. And when you do see variations such as this, that it's a coaching opportunity. You're going to go back to that specific store and talk to them about maybe their serving sizes are off. Maybe they're not following the recipe to a T. So again, you know, it's one thing to have a discrepancy pointed out, but it's another thing to have a discrepancy pointed out where you can say, you know what, thank you. I'm going to add that to my own data set. In fact, on a regular basis, I test my own restaurants and we use every data point as a coaching opportunity if need be. So I know it sounds like I'm turning lemons into lemonade, but I think that's what you have to be prepared to do because somebody's going to question the values. Okay, next question. Do you know the standard way FDA would evaluate nutrition, like a standard nutrient database they would use to analyze? Okay, good question. So in our second webinar, first and second webinar, we talked about the different ways to get nutritional data. And so in the regulations specifically, FDA says that they accept a number of different ways of getting nutritional information, specifically full laboratory analysis. They list using a database, whether that's in a software or it's in a printed form. They talk about using cookbooks. If you have a cookbook that you use that has nutritional information in it. They talk about using the nutritional facts panel on retail products. So maybe if you go to the grocery store and you buy certain items as ingredients, you can look at the back panels of those nutritional, or the nutritional facts panels on the back panels of those items and use that to build your menu item. And then they also talked about using USDA databases. There are some FDA databases that are published that if you go to our website and inquire, I can send you the links to those. I believe those links are also in one, if not both, of the previous webinars. So there are a number of different ways that the FDA looks or allows you to get that data. Specifically, if they pulled a sample, how would they evaluate it? If they pulled a sample at your restaurant, that means they're actually gathering food at your restaurant. And I don't know if they will ever engage in that activity or not. We'll have to wait and see. They would be sending it to a lab for analysis. In a lot of cases, they may also be able to look at your menu item, look at your calorie count. And if you're way off, a food scientist will realize that in about 2 seconds. So it'll be interesting to see how they perform enforcement. But they do allow you to get nutritional data from a variety of sources. I hope that answered that question. Okay, any other questions out there? Oh, one more question. How do I get the slides from these webinars so we have the active links? You will be able to do that after the broadcast today. I believe you'll be receiving an email to that effect because you'll also, if anybody registered for today and couldn't watch, you can always rewatch on demand or watch on demand. So you will have the slides and the links, so you guys can check those out on your own. And I would encourage anybody to go ahead and Google nutritional disclaimer, because that there are more websites than just the few that I detailed today, and you can kind of see how different people format those things. And for any of our clients specifically, we walk people through completing all of this due diligence. As a company, we obviously perform nutritional analysis by lab methods. We do it by database methods. But for our clients, we also help them walk through different regulations. How are they going to be in compliance? And then additionally, how are they going to prepare for really the day that they put all of this information out? How are they going to train their folks? How are they going to answer questions? And we are a continuous resource for our clients. All right, I'm just going to give a couple of minutes for any additional questions. And that webinar that we have coming up on Monday, December 22nd, I know we're getting really, really close to the Christmas holiday. Several of you may be off next week. Go ahead and register today. And even if you're not able to make that 2 p.m. December 22nd, when you get back from vacation, you'll already have an email in your inbox that can tell you how you can watch it on demand. And then you can always contact us with questions at any time. So go ahead, register. You can always watch a replay if you miss it. All right, so any other questions out there? All right, I don't see any more questions popping up, so I think we're going to maybe call it a wrap for today. Appreciate your time. I hope you found the webinar to be educational. And again, this is what we do. This is what I do every day. I laugh and tell people I just sit and stare out the window until somebody calls me to ask me a compliance question. But truly, that it's what I enjoy doing, is walking people through regulations, talking to them about compliance, and just getting them comfortable with the job they have to perform. So thanks, everybody. And again, check out our website and feel free to contact us with any other questions.